Hi, welcome to Donegal Dad. I'm Mark. This week I'm going to be looking at my Class 43, my Intercity 125. Going to be hardwiring a decoder into it and adding some lights. This Hornby model dates from around the early 90s. It came out of a train set pack. It's for DC, so the decoder has to be hardwired in, there's no sockets. Before we do anything to it, the first thing to check is, does it run? Does it run well? Because if it doesn't run well on DC, it won't run well on DCC. So we'll stick it on the rolling road here and give it some power and see how it goes. Right, I've got an old Hornby power pack. That's running quite well, and we'll try it the other direction. Yeah, that's running fine. What I'll do is I'll leave it to run for a few minutes, either direction, just to make sure it is okay. And then we'll start fitting the decoder. So, after testing this and establishing that it runs well on DC, it's ready for the decoder fitting. Let's have a look at the decoder. This is just a cheap decoder I'm using. I think they're about £10–11. Have you noticed, because this is going to be hardwired in, I've cut the plug off the end. And we'll just go through what all the wires are. You can see they're all different colours. So we have a purple wire, which is for function 2. Green, which is for function 1. So what I mean by functions, if you had something else fitted to your machine, like a smoke generator or something like that, you could use these to control those functions. Orange and grey go to the motor, and red and black go to the track feeds. White is for the forward lights, and yellow is for the rear lights, and purple, I'm sorry, that's blue, is the common positive for all the functions. So when you get a decoder, usually you can go online and download an instruction pack for the decoder, which gives you all the details of the CVs and all the information on the decoder. You'll see here I got some red and white LEDs. I'm going to be using these for the lights. These are lighthouse LEDs. You can see how, let's get that to focus. They've got a point on them. So what I'm doing is, these are 2mm, so I'll be drilling some 2mm holes, just pushing that through so it's flush and holding it in place with a little bit of glue. And that will give a pinpoint of light to act as the headlights. So let's strip this down into its parts and then get the soldering iron out and get cracking. Here it is now, stripped down. So we have the body shell, the cab area seating. I've taken off the light lens off the front, and these come with a 12-volt bulb when they're running on DC, which is controlled by this lead here, which has a diode in it. So the bulb would only come on when it's running in a certain direction, because remember, a diode only allows power to go in one direction. And here's the motor. Now, the way this motor is designed, we need to do a bit of work to it to get it to work with DCC, because the whole metal body shell here is basically one connection. So the power comes up through the wheels into the shell and then comes through that screw onto this brush here to feed the motor. So we need to insulate that screw and take the power from the body to go to the chip, and then the power from the chip decoder onto the motor arm here. So I'm going to strip this down. We also need to take this capacitor out and throw it away. It's not needed on DCC. So let's start stripping this apart. when you're taking this apart, you just need to be careful, because there is a spring under here that attaches to the carbon brush, that it doesn't ping out, because if that goes on the floor, now you can see how it's attached to the brush. And if that goes on the floor, you're never going to find it again. So I'll just take this one off as well, holding it in place with my thumb just to stop it springing off, because we just need to take this paster out. Right, that's that gone. So we can screw that one back in place. So we need to insulate this. So all I do here is I get some insulation tape, wrap it around to make sure the screw can't make contact with the metal. So there's the end of it. A little bit of insulation tape around it, just to stop the screw making contact with the metal. So we'll put that together again now, and then we'll use a multimeter just to check to make sure there is no continuity between the body and this. Here we have a multimeter now to test for continuity. You'll see when I put the contacts together, you hear a buzzer and it goes down to 0. So we'll use that to test on here. So we put one probe on the arm and then one on the screw. And you can see there's no noise, staying at 1. So that means this screw is isolated from this. And if I put it on there, you can hear it buzzing. Not on there. And if I put it on the wheel that supplies the electricity to it, you can see it's not making any noise. So we've successfully managed to isolate that screw and these wheels from that feed to the motor. So now we can get on with wiring in the decoder. I've stripped off the wires on the decoder and I've put some flux on them, and I'm just going to tin the wires now. This just makes it easier for soldering on later on. The two wires I'm not going to use, the purple and the green for functions 1 and 2, I've just sort of tied them in a little knot and pushed them down out of the way. So to solder, make sure your iron's nice and hot. Get a little bit of solder onto the tip. Let's give that a clean first. Also, a little bit of flux just helps clean the tip up. And if you actually tin the tip of the iron, it helps. So a little bit of solder and just rub it along the wire. And that's it tinned. The flux makes it a lot easier and helps the solder flow. Also, make sure you're doing this in a well ventilated area, because the fumes coming off can be a bit toxic, so make sure you've got the doors and windows open. I usually have a little fan on the desk to blow the smoke away. And also make sure you keep the tip clean. At the same time, on the motor, where you're going to attach, solder the wires directly on. A little blob of flux. And some solder. Basically, you're just tinning. You're just tinning the connection on this side, same as you would tin the wire. Now we can start soldering together. For the power connections, what I've done here is the lead that went off to the light is connected to the side of the motor here, so it's drawing power from these wheels up through the chassis. So I've just cut off the diode so I can solder one of the leads directly onto here for power, and then in the main chassis that would sit in there with this other chassis in here, so the other bogie in the chassis here, with that wire going back to the motor. So I'll simply cut that end off and solder the other power wire from the decoder onto that. So I'm going to solder all that together and then I'll come back and show it to you. There's all the soldering on the chip for the motor. So you can see we have the red wire going onto the feed here, which is fed from these wheels. And we have the black wire going on to this bogie here, which is fed from these wheels. And then we have the orange and grey going to power the motor. And we've still got the yellow, blue and white here off to one side for the lights. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to program this chip, test it, make sure it works before I go any further. Here it is on the rolling road, so let's give it a command now and see if it works. Yes, forward. And reverse. And back to forward again. And it works. So now we can get on and fit the lights. Just before we go on to fitting the LEDs, one thing to mention, if when you're testing after wiring in the chip and you find it's not responding to the commands, i.e. it's going back when it should be going forward and vice versa, you can do one of two things. You can either swap the orange and grey terminals around or adjust CV29, see what the value is on it and just add 1 to that value and that will change the direction. Now, LEDs. Now you can see on here, one leg is longer than the other. The longer leg is the positive. Now it's important that you wire LEDs up the right way round, because if you don't, they won't work, because they only work with the current flowing in one direction. Now these are 3 volt LEDs, and the power that comes out of the chip is 12 volts. So if I wired this up directly, it would blow the LED. Now for the red and the white, I'm going to wire the red in series and the white in series. And I'm also going to add a resistor. This is a 1K resistor, which should be big enough to bring the power down. If I put it in testing and I find the lights are too bright, then I'll just add another resistor in series just to bring it down. So we'll see how we're going to fit the LEDs now into the body. So there will be some cutting and drilling involved in fitting these. We can see there's 2 holes already. So I'm going to make them bigger, up to 2 mil. For the LEDs, and then beside it I'm going to drill another 2 holes for the other LEDs. So I'm going to put the white to the center and the red to the outside. Now I've looked at several pictures of HSTs as to the light positioning, and they seem to be both red in the center, white in the center, red on the outside, red on the inside. So I'm not sure which way I'm going to do them, but on this one I'm going to put it white to the center and red to the outside. I've even looked up pictures of this particular number, 43102, and over the years the lights seem to be different. So I'm going to stick to white in the centre and red on the outside. To drill the holes in your body, you can see I've already done the extra one on this side. What I'm going to do is I take a pin. It's hard to do while you're trying to watch it on camera. And where I want to drill, so I just use the pin to make an indent, so I know where I'm starting the pilot hole. It helps to stop the drill bit sliding around. So I want a 2mm hole, so I'm starting off with a 1mm bit, putting it in the indent I've already made, and just slowly start drilling in. Also being careful that you don't drill into your fingers on the other side. Just take your time with this. And we're through. And now I can change the bit to bigger. So I'm going to go straight up to the 2mm now. It just helps cut down on any damage and helps you get the hole exactly where you want it. Again, just slowly. And you can see there's the 2mm hole now for the red lights. So this set I'm using, it comes with various size bits. That's the pin vise there. You'll get them every so often. They come into Aldi. They're part of their work zone range. So they have bits there from 0.6 all the way up to 2.5mm. And they have them in left and right. So now on with wiring the lights. So you can see here I've made up the white light rig. So what I've done is I've taken the negative of one LED and soldered it on to the positive of the other LED, and then soldered a red cable onto the positive leg and a black wire onto the negative leg, so I know which one is positive and negative. I've put some heat shrink around them to protect against shorts, and I've connected in the middle with a little bit of yellow wire just to give me some flexibility when fitting them in place. So now I'll do the same with the red set, exactly the same, and then we can get them fitted in. There's the two looms made up. I've made the red one, the gap between them a bit bigger because they're going on the outside just to give me a bit more working room. Adding the cable in between gives you some flexibility because it is quite a small space to get all this into. So what I'm going to do now is solder a couple of resistors together, put them onto the red leads, and then start soldering it onto the chip, and then we'll test them and see if they work. That's the lighting looms now wired into the chip. So remember, we have the yellow wire, which is for the rear lights, the red ones, the white wire, which is for the front lights, i.e. the white ones, and then they're both wired into the common positive, which is the blue wire. And then I'll just isolate all these other wires with a bit of tape. I've made these wires probably a little bit too long, but there's plenty of room inside this body for putting excess wire, or I may just shorten them. We'll just see how we get on. But before we do anything else now, let's put it back on the track, test it, and make sure the lights work. Back on the rolling road, let's switch on the lights and see if they work. There's the forward lights. If we change direction, red lights come on. So they seem to be working. Let's start fitting them in to the body shell now. There, you can just see the LEDs poking out now through the holes. They weren't too fiddly to put in. Just push them in with some needle nose pliers just to position them. What I'm going to do now is put a little blob of glue. See them? Let's put a little blob of glue in them. You see how they're protruding. Put some glue on them, then push them back so they're flush, and let the glue dry. And then we can fit back in the cab, and then we'll have to paint some black in around side so there isn't any light bleed, and then reassemble. So just a little bit of glue, just put it around the lens of the LED. And then carefully just push it back so it's flush. And as you do that, it draws the glue in. There we go. So I'm just using a pin here just to push them back in. And now just let the glue dry for a few minutes. And you can see they're in there fine. Just make sure the glue you're using is safe to use on the plastic shell and on the LEDs. It's not going to react with either. So I'll leave that to glue for the glue to dry for a while, and then we'll go around fitting the lens and putting the body back together, and also doing a bit of painting inside to make sure there's no light bleed. There's the cab interior back in. I've also put the lens back on the front. So now what I'm going to do is just black acrylic paint and just paint all over the LEDs. Good thick coat so you get no bleed from the LEDs, and just give the whole interior a good coat of black, and this just helps eliminate any light bleed. We'll let that dry, and then what we'll do is we'll do a test before we fit it back together again, just to make sure it doesn't need another coat or there's no light bleeding through anywhere we might have missed a little bit of paint. But as long as you give the LEDs a good coating, then you shouldn't get any bleed. So we'll leave that to dry and see how it looks. Ready for reassembly. It's all been painted black in there. I had to cut away the front there to make it fit. A little tip for you: if you try fitting together when you've put some paint in there, when you take it out you'll see the wet paint on there, and you'll see exactly where you need to trim down. So I've tidied up the wires, I've taped them together. So let's just try and put this together. There's plenty of space in there for the wires, so I didn't trim them down. So it'll make it easier if I need to take it apart to do any other wiring in there. As I say, there's two spare function wires in there, which I could at a later stage put a cab light in, because I do want to take this apart again sometime and put a driver in. I don't actually have any drivers at the moment to put in there. So being careful not to catch any wires. And clip it together. There it is, all clipped into place. So let's put it on the track now and see how it runs. There she is on the track now. You see the forward lights are on. Reverse lights. And put it back to forward. she goes. There, hope you find that useful. Just a couple of points to note. For the insulation, I used a bit of tape there. You can get plastic screws to replace the metal ones, and that will do the insulation for you. You can also buy lighting kits to put in, just simple little boards, pre-wired resistors and LEDs, and you can slot those in and wire them to your decoder. I used quite long wires there, knowing that there was plenty of space inside the body to fit it all in. Usually I would use maybe shorter lengths and some thinner gauge wire just to help it all fit in. With the resistors, when you fit those, I fitted the resistors onto, I used the same resistor for all 4 LEDs. Now it would work because all the LEDs are exactly the same. You have to make sure your LEDs are the same, or the resistor won't work with all of them, and you'll find some will come on and some won't. Also, looking at it on the video, the lights do look very, very bright. I can show you they're not that bright. And as I say, if you want your lights to look dimmer, just put an extra resistor in. So, as always, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.